رمضان كريم 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 شهر عظيم 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 قم للعبادة تلقى السعادة قم للعبادة تلقى السعادة تلقى السعادة تلقى النعيم. رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات طوبى للنفس بتقواها. رمضان كريم 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 شهر عظيم 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 رمضان كريم 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 شهر عظيم 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 قم للعبادة تلقى السعادة قم للعبادة تلقى السعادة تلقى السعادة تلقى النعيم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Beloved brothers and sisters, with us this morning is Brother Nezam Zaman, who will speak to us on Muhaasabah, evaluating ourselves before we are evaluated. First, here's a recitation from Al-Quran by Brother Sayyad Bashk, a student of the Guyana Islamic Institute.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون. لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون. صدق الله العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, blessings and guidance of Almighty Allah be upon you. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Nabiina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. My beloved brothers and sisters, this morning our topic is very, very important and crucial to each and every one of us. On a daily basis, we all should reflect on our meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this is truth and we will all be raised to give account for what we did in this life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, يَوْمَ يَبْعَثُهُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا فَيُنَبِّئُهُم بِمَا عَمِلُوا أَحْصَاهُ اللَّهُ وَنَسُوهُ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of a day when we will all be raised together and we will have to give account. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell us of what we used to do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept a perfect record of what we did. Even though we forget it, we forget ourselves and the courses of actions that we choose to take in this life and how we choose to live, whether in obedience or disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a witness to everything we do. My beloved brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said قُلْ إِنَّ الْمَوْتَ الَّذِي تَفِرُّونَ مِنْهُ. Truly, death is something that we run from. فَإِنَّهُ مُلَاقِيكُمْ. But death will reach us. ثُمَّ تُرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ عَالِمِ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ فَيُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. Then we will be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will be told of everything that we used to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ayah mentions, ثُمَّ تُرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ عَالِمِ الْغَيْبِ. We will be returned to the one who is knowledgeable of the unseen, the knowledgeable of what happens in secret. So truly, if we desire, my beloved brothers and sisters, an easy reckoning with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we should take account of ourselves. We should take account of ourselves and evaluate ourselves now and correct ourselves from now, so that insha'Allah that we will have an easy reckoning with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my beloved brothers and sisters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ فَسَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا يَسِيرًا. The one who receives the book of records on the day of judgment in his right hand, from in front of him, he will have an easy reckoning. And this is the whole idea behind the necessity of you and I evaluating ourselves now before account is being taken for us in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My beloved brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad. O you who believe, have fear for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have fear for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Observe the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set, and look to what we put forward for tomorrow. Looking to what we put forward for tomorrow in the form of the good actions we present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and keeping away from the evils, it requires that we do self-evaluation of ourselves from now. Wattaqullaha. It repeats, the verse repeats the word fear Allah twice. That truly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my beloved brothers and sisters, is informed of what we do. So we adorn ourselves with taqwa. We adorn our lives with the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in private and in public, my beloved brothers and sisters. Taqwa is making a distance between ourselves and what we fear of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by creating a barrier. Do not come close to sinning. Stay far away from transgressing the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we fear the punishment of the hellfire. So this is what is taqwa. So we adorn ourselves with taqwa in private and in public. And we hold ourselves accountable for what we do in this world, my beloved brothers and sisters, and what the consequence of our actions will have in the hereafter. We take a special interest in that. So Umar radiallahu anh, he said, Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu. He said, as was related by Thabit ibn al-Hajjaj, he said, take account of yourselves. Hold yourselves accountable before you are held accountable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, Wazinu anfusakum qabla an tuzanu. Hold yourselves accountable. Evaluate yourselves before evaluation is taken for you, as it relates to the measure of good and the measure of evil that we do. فَإِنَّهُ أَهْوَنُ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْحِسَابِ غَدًا. That it will be easier for you to take account of yourselves tomorrow, and tuhasabu anfusakum al-yawm. Account will be easier for us tomorrow means on the day of judgment, if we are to take account of ourselves today, my beloved brothers and sisters. So muhasabah, taking account of ourselves, is an action of the heart. It is to evaluate one's actions, my beloved brothers and sisters, one's actions as it relates to our ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the actions between ourselves and our fellow human beings. The actions between the man and his wife, the actions between people when they do business together, the actions between a man and his neighbors. So we, on a regular basis, we take account of ourselves as it relates to the worship that we present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this world, because we don't want to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our actions, our salah, and our intentions behind doing the good deeds that we do, and that our relationship with people and the way we deal with people, whether we be just or unjust, fair or unfair to them, to be found wanting in this respect on the day of judgment. It is very important that on the day for our salvation, it is very important for our salvation that when we reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that our actions are properly rectified, and that our service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be up to standard. Also, on continuing the good deeds, continuing to do the good deeds as much as we can. If we, for example, if we're evaluating ourselves, in the evening, and we find that we have a chance to do good deeds. Today, I had a chance to do some more dhikr. I had the chance to recite Quran, open the Quran and recite it. I had a chance to do some charity, but I didn't do it because instead of opening the Quran to recite it, I chose to scroll on my phone on the internet. Instead of giving charity, I chose to withhold it out of meanness. So we analyze ourselves like this on a regular basis, and then we correct ourselves and we make every effort. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Ma nahaytukum anhu fajtanibuh." What I have prevented you from doing, the prohibitions, shun them. My beloved brothers and sisters, shunning, when the word shun is used, it's a very strong word. It's just not keeping away from it. It is distancing ourselves from it. Shun it altogether. So all of the prohibitions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set, we don't go near to them. So if we find that we are going near to the prohibitions, then we should know to ourselves that going close to the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one day, after going closer and closer to Allah's prohibitions, one day we shall soon fall into sinning. We shall soon fall into the disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to guard our iman. The one who guards himself as it relates to this, he has indeed guarded his honor and his faith with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, keep away, shun what he has prevented us from. وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. What I've commanded you, do as much as you can. So we analyze where we are falling short of as it relates to fulfilling the rights of Allah and fulfilling the rights of others, so that we can rectify it the next day, or we can rectify it as soon as we can. My beloved brothers and sisters, we should also seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in doing this, because falling into sin is what shaitan is working on us with. So we're always vulnerable in this case. So we seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we do evaluation of ourselves. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Ihris ala ma yanfa'uka," that be eager upon what benefits you. Wasta'in billah, and seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wala ta'jaz, and do not become frustrated. We are human beings. We will fall short. We will make mistakes. But the most important thing when we make mistakes is that we do account of ourselves. We do account of ourselves, my beloved brothers and sisters, and we correct the wrongs in our lives. We take account of ourselves and do not be careless, because if we be careless upon our mistakes that we're making in this life and we consider them small, then the day of resurrection, when we face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for Allah to take account from us, will be a time for regret. We seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the time when we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give account for what we do, that it will not be a time of regret. That it will be a time when we will be happy. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Surah Al-Haqqa, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ فَيَقُولُ هَاؤُمُ اقْرَءُوا كِتَابِيَهْ. That when he sees his book of reckoning, he is so pleased and happy with it. He is so pleased and happy with it that he says, oh, come and read my book. Come and read my, he's saying, proclaiming, come and read my book. That I have always been conscious, and I know that I will have to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know that this time of reckoning will come when I have to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let this time for us be a time of joy by our doing account of ourselves before account is done for us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My beloved brothers and sisters, many times we disregard the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful to you and I. We disregard the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We leave it off. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not deprive us of our needs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not deprive us. So we should be shy, my beloved brothers and sisters. We should be shy to commit disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should feel the urge not to go and transgress the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we know that without Allah's help we cannot survive. It is by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that our limbs are working, that I'm seeing you and you're seeing me, I'm hearing you and you're hearing me. These are bounties that we can never give enough thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. So we should always look at these, look into the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us. And we can't count them. وَإِن تُحْصُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. That if you try to count the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can never be able to count them, my beloved brothers and sisters. So to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our taking account of ourselves now will help us to develop a shyness in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That even if we think about doing something small and we consider it insignificant, but it's something that is of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we, through self-evaluation, when we think and we get the urge to do these small acts of evil, we will be able to imagine the greatness of the one who we are going to disobey. We will remember that what I'm going to do here is in gratitude to the one who loves and provides and takes care of me. So, on the other hand, if we fail to take account of ourselves, my beloved brothers and sisters, if we fail to take account of ourselves, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. That do not be like the people who forget to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Forget in this sense means to neglect the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, neglect the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause them to forget the good deeds that they need to do, that are crucial to their success in the hereafter. So do not be like those who forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that these are the people who are defiant. These are the people who are disobedient. These are the people who They are ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause them to forget the good deeds that they are supposed to do. My beloved brothers and sisters, we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from these. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to seek protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evil of what is within the soul. Our nafs, my beloved brothers and sisters, our nafs is something that will lead us to do evil. Inna nafsa la'ammaratum bisu. Truly, the soul, the ego, it commands us to do evil. So we constantly do self-evaluation of ourselves. Like we said, we do self-evaluation of our actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our actions between people, and we do evaluation of our nafs, so as to protect us from the evils of the heart, the evils of envy, jealousy, hatred. All of these are serious sins. So the nafs, my beloved brothers and sisters, we need to evaluate it, because the nafs, the soul or the ego, it is like, as I read, it is like a treacherous business partner. Treacherous in the sense that a business partner who is always there to rob you in business, is always there to leave you without. So if we do not hold our nafs accountable, we don't take account of what is within our hearts, then it will run away with our success and land us in the pit of destruction. That is hellfire, my beloved brothers and sisters. This month of Ramadan is the perfect time. Indeed, Ramadan, my beloved brothers and sisters, is a time where the mercies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are extended to us. It trains us to gain mastery. It trains us, fasting trains us to take control over our nafs by self-restraint. My beloved brothers and sisters, if we are able to control ourselves, control our nafs, control the evil temptations that are there within our hearts, and the evil inclinations, and if we're able to control ourselves and do not hate, envy, and malice, if we're able to do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guarantees us the highest success, that is paradise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. And the one who fears the meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who fears the standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he prevents his soul, his nafs, from evil desires, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَىٰ. The one who restrains the evil desires and repel them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Jannah will be his position. Jannah will be his abode. My beloved brothers and sisters, so let us take some time and look into our hearts and find where we envy people, find where we have pride, arrogance, where we have hatred for people, and where we are tempted to backbite people from what we have hold in our hearts for them. And let us get rid of it. And let us do this on a regular basis, my beloved brothers and sisters. My beloved brothers and sisters, we should at least once every day, we should assess what went well in our duties towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we would have prayed our salah, would have prayed on time, and we would have had good concentration within our prayers. We would have given charity, whatever we can of good deeds that we did during the day. We don't only evaluate what we did wrong and where we fell short, but we look at what we did well in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that we can build upon it. We analyze our weaknesses and our mistakes and shortcomings that we committed during the day, and we seek forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. We hate what we did. We vow not to return to that evil, and we work towards staying away from it. So the weaknesses that we had, we reflect upon them so that the next day we would not fall into them again. So we do that assessment of ourselves. We look at the opportunities that we would have had to do more good deeds in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe I would have not done enough dhikr. I would not have raised my hands to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we make resolutions that the next day or after then, we make more dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are more opportunities for us to do good. Let us analyze ourselves, find those opportunities and make use of them. And then we seek to recognize what the threats that are there, the temptations of shaitan, the temptations that are in front of our eyes during the day, the temptations of gaining more money through illicit robbing people, to doing illicit business transactions so that we rob the people, or we trade in haram commodities, whatever it is. We reflect upon that, our day of work, and what are the threats that are there that will draw us into the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will bring the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon ourselves. So we take account of ourselves in that, my beloved brothers and sisters. And when we commit sin, whilst we analyze ourselves and we do account of ourselves, as I said, we seek the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and those who, when they committed immoral sin or wronged themselves with evil, they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they seek His forgiveness. They seek His forgiveness for their sins. And the ayah says, and who can forgive sins except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do not persist in these wrongdoings. My beloved brothers and sisters, our accountability, like we said, should be, and I repeat, let us analyze our obligatory deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let us analyze the deeds that are not compulsory upon us, that we do them, how we can benefit them. We analyze ourselves as it relates to our involvement in the haram acts so that we can seek repentance and shun them. We analyze ourselves that if we would have spent some time during the day doing something heedless, that even though it might not be classified as sinful or haram, it is something that will not bring us any benefit and will gradually pull us into more and more evil, so that we will not benefit from the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with. So these heedless activities that, like I said, might not be haram, but it is not conducive for us to fulfill our purpose in life. My beloved brothers and sisters, we assess our intentions, we assess our sincerity, the actions that we do during the day. Was it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Did I do these acts to gain some other benefit other than to gain the pleasure and the rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? My beloved brothers and sisters, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can make it a habit in our lives to take account of ourselves as it relates to the actions we do, the actions of worship, the actions between each other, and the actions of our heart, so that when the time comes and we stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will not be a time for regret. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us mindful of our outer and inner deeds and allow us to prepare for His meeting. Ameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Until tomorrow, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
رمضان صيام ودعاء، رمضان أمان وصفاء، رمضان صيام ودعاء، رمضان أمان وصفاء، رمضان سلوك وعطاء. أهلا بقدومك يا رمضان. رمضان كريم كريم كريم، شهر عظيم عظيم عظيم. قم للعبادة تلقى السعادة، قم للعبادة تلقى السعادة، تلقى السعادة.